Of the year by the Governor's Journal, and what a year it has been here in Wisconsin and nationwide, from recounts to recalls and protests to policy changes. Joining us live this morning, Governor Scott Walker, thank you so much for being here this morning.
Great to be with you. Happy New Year.
Same to you. Let's start with that article from Governor's Journal. It calls you, I want to quote it here because it says, the best symbol of the struggle between the two political parties about how to best meet those fiscal challenges. The best symbol of the struggle.
Well, it's one of those where we just tried to come in and fix something. You know, we saw an incredible challenge the state of Wisconsin faced, both an economic and a fiscal crisis earlier this year. And when it came to the fiscal crisis, it's not a new one. In fact, I guess that Governor's Journal named Andrew Cuomo the next runner-up on that, a Democrat from New York, because he's trying to face some of the same challenges in that state, like many governors are across the country. And it's one of those where it's not a new thing. We've been talking about this for years when I was the county executive. And finally we thought, you know, not just for me, but more importantly for Matt and Alex, my two kids, and every other kid out there, we want to make sure we fix it for the future.
It also goes on to say that the recall that you are likely facing coming up next year could be, aside from this other presidential race, the biggest political story of 2012.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting. Again, we didn't do it for that purpose. We did it probably first out of the gate, got the most attention, but we did it to fix our problem, which we did. We took a $3.6 billion budget deficit a year ago and then turned it into a budget that ends with a surplus, one for which most people across the state saw their property taxes the same or lower in the past couple of weeks as they got the bills out there. We kept things intact, but politically, I think it's probably right. You saw the tens of millions of dollars that were spent on the Senate recall elections, many of those dollars coming in from outside the state. My guess is you're probably going to see some of the same things in these recall election for governor and the 3 or 4 other Senate elections that may happen at the same time.
And we'll talk about the recall efforts in just a moment, but let's look back at this year, because my first memory of you this year, you and I were both down in Texas for the Super Bowl.
Yeah.
You were, of course, were in the Packers. I got the assignment to cover it, but I'm talking, you know, the Packers in the Super Bowl, and then things changed pretty quickly.
About a week later. Yeah, I was hoping that we'd ride that out for the rest of the year, and who knows, maybe the great unifier may be at the beginning of February this year when the Packers repeat. But yeah, no, it was one of those where, you know, that was kind of short-lived attention on that, and we made major changes. But I think the biggest thing was because we not only changed collective bargaining, which ultimately put the power back in the hands of the people. You know, my respect for the taxpayers of the state said they should be the ones driving both state and local decisions. But it's really more than anything. I think the reason you see the national money that came in was because we gave every public employee in the state the right to choose whether that employee wants to be a part of a public employees union. And I think that's why you see the big dollars here, will probably in the coming months.
All right, so big picture, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, looking back at 2011, what do you think people will say about this year?
Well, I think it's one of those where they'll say this was the time when, set it aside, Democrat, Republican, plenty of blame to be given in the past, but where the state government finally stepped up and made decisions that thought more about the next generation than just about the next election.
And what would you do anything different looking back?
Yeah, I do. I think January and February this year, instead of, I kind of have that mindset that sometimes as a small business owner you see a problem, you find a solution, you just fix it. Right. Because we live in a political environment, I should have spent more time laying the groundwork. If I mentioned how, for example, school districts have to pay tens of millions of dollars more for health insurance just because they can't bid it out, and made the case for that. Now the reforms allow them to save that money, but before they couldn't. If I talked about the abuses and overtime that allowed a bus driver, for example, in Madison, to make $150,000 or more per year, I think most people would look at that and say, well, somebody's got to fix that. We didn't make that case, and in retrospect, I think I probably should have spent more time making the case up front instead of having to do it afterwards.
All right, so now looking ahead to 2012 and the recall that you will likely face, organizers say they're well on their way to collecting the amount of signatures that they see. We've seen, of course, on both sides, the Mickey Mouse names popping up on the ballot, a man in Brookfield charged for coming after a recall gatherer, a signature gatherer. What's your plan moving forward?
Well, we're going to be, you know, we've got a plan and a positive outlook for the future, so I view this as an opportunity. And recall organizers basically said a few weeks ago, you know, their goal was to get 1 million signatures. I've said all along I thought they'd get at least 600,000 to 700,000. Now they're aiming for 1 million. I've said all along I thought they'd get it, but I think as an optimist, it gives me a chance to lay out the groundwork of not only what we did and how it's working, how schools and local governments and the state government are arguably better than they were before, how the people of the state, you know, have seen their property taxes go down or stay the same in nearly every place, but also looking forward, because that's really what elections are about. They're about the future, not about the past. We can talk about how we're going to help the people of the state create 250,000 new jobs by 2015, how after 3 years of losing jobs, 150,000 jobs lost in the past, how we're slowly starting to gain new jobs, 16,000 up this year already, but how we want to get to 250,000 by 2015. That's really the debate and the discussion we're going to have in the coming months.
You have to give yourself a letter grade on 2011. What would it be?
Well, I'd say about a B. I mean, I think it's A for the effort of really trying to tackle the issue, but I think we've got a long ways to go in terms of communications. We could have done a better job explaining it, and hopefully we'll in the future, learn from the past.
All right, Governor Walker, thank you so much for being here.
And Happy New Year to you and all the viewers.
All right, Kim, over to you.
Thank you. The holiday